Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Hello and welcome back to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast. Now, it is widely recognized that meditation provides a slew of health benefits, from reducing psychological stress to supporting sleep and even enhancing well-being. But did you know that meditation can also help to improve our connection with loved ones? So that's what we're exploring in this episode today, where we're joined by functional medicine health coach Bridget Pennington, who has amazingly enough coached over hundreds of people supporting their physical and emotional health. Hi, Bridget. It's lovely having you here.
Thank you. You can call me B.
Okay, I will. So for starters, B, what is a misconception about meditation that you've heard, and what can we learn from it?
Oh, a misconception about meditation. Oh, I think there's actually plenty. And I think of them as barriers to meditation. And so firstly, I want to just premise this by saying the approach that I come to about meditation is largely based on my work in the clinic, where we're working with people who have suboptimal health. Their stress levels are really high and they need to use different strategies to help their bodies regulate and then overcome those stresses, right? So a lot of these people aren't feeling great to start with. And so they will say to me things a little bit like what you just said to me before. I can't keep my mind still. It needs to look a certain way. I think if I was going to sort of encapsulate all of the little barriers, it really is that there's a perception of what meditation has to look like. And all of those things feel really hard for me to do and to get on board with. And so typically they're things like, I can't empty my mind. I can't keep my mind still. Like you said, my mind just keeps on thinking and but you believe maybe that it's meant to be silent. Some people physically just find the idea of sitting still for any length of time really like a massive obstacle. They'll say things like, I can't empty my mind, I can't find 20 minutes, the house is too noisy. And you know what, for the really honest ones, they'll say it's too boring. And when I hear the people say it's too boring, how I interpret that is, I'm in such a busy activated state. I'm so sort of up here in that sort of sympathetic reactive fight and flight state, that to sit somewhere in a calmness actually feels uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does. And so what would the practice be for that situation where you're in that fight or flight state?
Oh, that's a huge question. How much time have we got? That's the premise of, so I come at meditation a little differently. I'm not coming at it from the theological, the spiritual, the transcendental model and approach. Like, I think all of those things are supremely valuable. And if that's where you're heading, keep heading there. That's amazing. I'm really thinking about the entry, like the starting point, the people who just can't actually get into any sort of meditation. And so what I encourage is dismantling the whole idea, the whole story of what meditation is. And if we're thinking of it from that stress response perspective, so we've got your parasympathetic, rest, digest, reproduce, and repair. And we've got the sympathetic, fight, flight, freeze. It's reactive, it's elevated, it's activated, it's, ongoing stress hormones. What we really want to do is train the body to spend less time up in that reactive state and just spend more and more time down here. And the thing about the autonomic nervous system is you actually don't want to stay all the time in one or the other place, right? What we want to be is adaptive. And so a healthy autonomic nervous system has this beautiful ability to go where it needs to go. So something happens and you're activated, and so you have the appropriate emotional and physical and chemical hormonal response. And the body deals with that, and you re-regulate and you come back down, and then you can rest and digest and repair. And so I know this is a long answer, but that's important to understand, because my entry for these people is to dismantle what you believe it has to look like, and then start as small as you can, like the smallest you can.
Yeah, and that's really important as well into starting meditation practices, because a lot of people look at meditation as this gigantic thing that they just can't do. And in practicing it just for a minute to 5 minutes, and starting with that, being able to master that, or not even master it really, but being able to practice it.
Good catch. It doesn't.
Yeah.
You don't have to master
you
it.
don't have to be a perfectionist with it, but just
Yeah.
to practice it and to try it, and to get used to that.
Yeah.
That's a great entry point. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people are missing. So it's great work that you're doing.
Well, you just said something that's another thing that actually comes up really often. You're like 5 to 10 minutes. And if I'm speaking to someone who's really stressed out or really unwell, and they know they want to meditate, and we start sort of dismantling and breaking it down, and then coming up with a bit of a plan, like what's the starting strategy? And I'll always invite someone to define their own parameters, right? And I'll say, okay, well, tell me for you what feels like the amount of meditation you can do that's got the least resistance and the least barriers that you know that you can commit to, Marie. And then you'll say 5 to 10 minutes. And I'll say, is that true? Because 5 to 10 minutes is like a common, like we've plucked it out. It's what other people would say. I think it's going to work for me. And I would then challenge it and say, is 5 to 10 minutes really where you want to start? And you might say, oh, now that I think about it, maybe 2 minutes. There's a guy named BJ Fogg who works out of one of the American universities, and he did all this work around tiny habits. And it's a really lovely approach, and you can sort of borrow from that for something like this. And tiny habits are about the one smallest action that you can take that is heading towards where you want to go. And so, for example, he would say, if you want to increase your dental hygiene and you want to floss your teeth, but you just never get there because it's such a boring thing, etc., commit to yourself to floss one tooth. If you floss one tooth, you've done your job, mission successful, get on with your day. Chances are you've got the floss, you've done one tooth, you're probably going to do another tooth, right? So there's going to be an add-on effect. And similarly with things like exercise and movement, instead of saying, I'm going to walk for 10 minutes or I'm going to walk around the block, for a lot of people, it's I'm going to put my shoes on or I'm going to walk to the letterbox. And so if we're borrowing from that concept, I would suggest that the tiny habits approach to meditation is one breath.
Yeah, I really, really like that. I also learned in another episode that we did just recently about tiny habits as well. And
great.
it was about cleaning and minimalism. And the strategy that this guest had was a 15-minute win. So you clean up and you tidy up for 15 minutes and you count how many wins you had. And it makes it a bit like gamified. And the 15 minutes is short enough for you to be successful at completing a task and makes you feel good about yourself. It's like positive reinforcement almost. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The cool thing about a single breath is it's the fastest way to physiologically change your body, because there's all of this there are these mechanisms that are built into your physiology that mean a breath in done a certain way is actually enough to change your state. And so I've been working in functional medicine clinic since 2016. And one of the very first people I coached we'll often say to people to do 4-7-8 breathing, which is in for 4, hold for 7, and out for 8. So the qualities of that calming breath are that you're breathing in through your nose. All the signaling happens to tell your body you're safe. You hold for 7 and then you're out for 8. And so the exhale is twice as long as the inhale. And that's really valuable as well when what we're aiming for is that down-regulating and parasympathetic. And I spoke to this man who was a really busy businessman, like in and out of big meetings, lots of big stuff happening. And he said to me, B, that single breath changes everything about who I am in that moment and for the minutes after that. Like, we really underestimate the power of something small. We've got this weird thing, I think, and I'm speaking very broadly for lots of people, so it'll be true for some and not for others. But I think people expect things that are going to work need to be really complex, really expensive, and possibly take lots of time. And when it comes to your health and your well-being and your physiology, I actually think the opposite is true.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know because that makes it a lot more approachable. And before we get further into detail, I like to get to know you better. This is Have You Met B? And my first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, I like to breathe. There's no mystery about that. I actually do. I go to breathwork classes here in Melbourne, and they're quite life-changing. But outside of that, I'm an absolute nature lover. So anything I can do in nature, I do. And I've got a beautiful little dog, so I walk her twice a day, which brings those two together really beautifully.
Yeah, that's so sweet. Any nature spots that you like to go to specifically?
Oh, mountains, beaches, and forests.
So almost all of them.
Yeah, there's not one for me that's better than the other. I've done a series of sort of overnight mountain climbs, which I've really loved. Like the snow is complex and then you have beautiful little shoots coming out and you've got that contrast of growth against the snow. It's all just so beautiful.
Yeah, snow is fascinating to me, which I'm now realizing is an interesting thing to say, but it is.
It is an interesting. What do you mean?
It's fascinating. Well, I grew up in a tropical climate, so snow is fascinating to me.
Absolutely. That makes total sense.
But I've yet to see really good snow because I heard that snow outside of Australia is better in New Zealand.
Okay. Well, as a Kiwi, I have to support that.
Yeah. Are there any spots where you think I should go for snow in New Zealand?
Oh, anywhere on the South Island.
Oh, South Island.
South Island for sure.
No way. I'm thinking of going there end of the year, like sometime during October between after or before the school holidays.
We can talk after. I'll give you some hot spots.
Sure, thank you so much. Well, is there anything that you bring along with you on any of your nature trips? Anything that you just have to have with you?
What do you mean?
Like a book or...
Oh. On my nature trips?
Yes.
As long as I've got my phone so I can take photos.
It's also probably safer to have your phone now with you for Find My iPhone in case of anything, not sponsored. But
it's all about photography for me.
When you are not on your nature trips, what do you like to do?
I'm a bit of a potterer. I think I do work quite a bit, and then when I'm not actually working, I'm kind of dreaming up meditations and I'm running women's circles, and I really was reflecting on what do I do, and outside of life admin. So I've got a teenage daughter, and running the house and working.
Yeah.
Especially in winter, there's actually not that much time.
To be fair, life admin does take up a lot.
It does.
Of time.
It does.
It's really a part-time job.
Yeah.
At this point.
I'm all for the 4-day weekend.
Me too.
Just quietly.
Yeah, because even with the 4-day work week.
No, I said 4-day weekend.
Oh, 4-day weekend. Yeah. Okay.
3-day work week.
3-day work week. Even with a 3-day work week, okay, life admin takes up at least 1 day. At the very least.
Yeah.
So on most weeks, you'd have like pretty much 2 days of the weekend or 3 days max. So does that not seem like the normal amount that we should be striving for when it comes to work?
Totally. Yeah, we absolutely should. Yeah.
But in your life, either in your professional life or your personal life? Is there someone that you look up to the most?
There's not one person. There's a bunch of people. Yeah. And the people that really come to mind are people like Gabor Mate and Byron Katie. I'm thinking of people who have had experiences in their lives and they have found like a reframe on the way we think, right? Like I think as a society, a lot of us think the same way as each other, right? We kind of conform a lot and not many people challenge mindsets, ways of thinking. And both Gabor Mate and Byron Katie are incredible at offering a new perspective. The thing I love about Byron Katie's work, called The Work, is there's a process to it. So it's 4 steps. And it means that you can take a thought that's causing you stress, you can question it, you can check in to see if it's true, you can turn it around. And it's all based in the actual reality, not what your ego tells you, not what you want to be true, not the story of the past or the future. The only thing that's true is the seat that I'm sitting on, the microphone in front of me, the rings on my finger. That's the actual truth. And honestly, that changed my life. I really used the work to investigate some of my beliefs about some relationships or some experiences. And when you go through a process of investigating it and you actually find out the real truth or that you don't know the truth, it changes everything. So she's amazing.
I really like that because I do a lot of introspection, but most of it is pretty abstract. Like I do that questioning thing, but there's not really a framework that I've built in my mind. So it sounds like that would be really helpful. And not just to me, but a lot of people who try journaling, for example, or try to be introspective. It sounds like there's a framework that could really, really help with that because not a lot of people know where to start or
Totally agree. And they think they have to go to therapy or speak to someone. If you are a person who's having a stressful thought, the framework of The Work is brilliant. You need guidance through it. There's a bit of nuance and skill with it. She's got some great books about it. So she's incredible. And what Gabor Mate is doing for the story of trauma and teaching people. He and his son have just released a course actually about the parent-to-child trauma stuff. And I haven't, it's on my desktop. I'm gonna look into it. But he keeps on putting out really amazing content that helps us understand ourselves, why we've built our psyches the way we have around what happened when we were little kids. And the other person that stood out for me, because I think there are actually the whole podcast could be about amazing people. But people like, there's a guy in New Zealand and he's got a Instagram account called My Father's Barber. And he's a guy, big guy, as in, looks strong. He experienced abuse as a young person and he is grabbing New Zealand men who have been abused. And, it's so beautiful, the work he does. He teaches them how to be men, but in a really honest, it's not an ego masculine thing. It's
vulnerable.
Like you are safe and let's see your pain for what it was and let me teach you how to move through that instead of just giving it to the next generation. So someone like that breaks generational cycles and it's massive.
Yeah, that is massive. And it's also like even without the trauma of abusive relationships, it is really hard to be sensitive, to find a space where you can be sensitive and vulnerable and raw sometimes.
Especially
as
for
a
men. And
Yeah.
especially when you grow up, I think, in countries like New Zealand and Australia, it's the blokey bloke,
Yeah.
tricky.
Yeah.
Tricky if you've got big feelings.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and some great recommendations in there that I definitely have to go and look up after this. But for now, let's move on to the interview section. And for starters, we'd like to define what personal development is. So what does it mean to you?
Well, I'm a visual person. And when I think of personal development, I think of a spiral. So you're born and you're this little dot, and then you get your first set of skills. moving, walking, talking, crawling, and then your spiral starts moving out. And then the next year at that same spot, the next year you might be walking, and then you go around again. And then at that same spot the next year, you might be engaging in different dynamics of relationships. And so when I think about that through that personal development lens, it's not that you're a different person. You're exactly who you were. And then you've built on top of it, or you've reframed something, and you can look at your world quite differently. So each time you go out another circle and another circle, the world can look really different, but you've been where you've been and you just keep expanding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it completely makes sense. And what do you think social connection does to contribute to personal growth?
Oh, well, Johann Hari would say it's one of the 7 critical elements of emotional well-being. I, I think there's more and more evidence now. And to be honest, I haven't looked at the science of it. But you'll hear a lot of people say things like social loneliness is the new smoking. They're really recognizing now that social connection is really important for lots of things about our psychology and our emotional well-being. And if you strip it all back to the basic stuff, we were born in tribes. And when you were part of a tribe, you were safe, and it actually meant you could survive. And when people were outcast, it was actually a threat to their survival. You know, if you were, for whatever reason, sent away from the tribe, that was actually a threat to your survival. And so loneliness and being alone, we've still got the original wiring in our brains. It hasn't changed, the world around us has changed, but all of our wiring, our neurochemistry, that all exists as it did in the beginning. And so that perception thing's really, I was talking to a patient yesterday actually about how the different parts of the brain work. And she was sharing with me that a number of years ago she'd had a couple of big panic attacks, and they were around sleep. And now she's anchored this belief on that somehow the panic attack and her sleep are connected. And so sleep now is really tricky for her. And we were talking about the part of her brain, that reptilian part of the brain, that's the one coming in saying, with the loudest voice, it's the oldest mechanics in the brain, you need to make sure you're safe. I don't want you to die, right? And it's drowning out all of the logic and reasoning and all of the creative stuff, and it's running the show for her.
Okay, so could you tell me a bit more about that reptilian part of our brain? How does that work?
Well, I'm not a neuroscientist. I can only speak to the bits that I know of. But there are different parts of your brain, prefrontal cortex, limbic, so executive function and emotions, logic and reason, all the stuff we kind of use a lot as we navigate our busy little worlds. But you've got this part of the brain that really kind of was, now again, I don't know if this is actually accurate, but like one of the older parts of the brain that's kind of been around because humans have needed to survive forever, right? And that part of the brain is about sensing your environment, determining safety, or making sure that you know to pay attention if there's a threat, right? And we get so kind of caught up in this front part of the brain, and we don't really appreciate that fella back there is actually driving quite a bit of the stuff that, that anxiety, that background anxiety stuff. And like there's a voice that wants to come up. Yeah. I almost think of it. In fact, when we were coaching yesterday, we actually gave that part of her brain a different personality. Like we called him, we actually didn't agree on a name, but I was playing around with names like Peter and Tony.
I was thinking Tony.
Well, there you go. Tony was the standout name. But that idea that when she notices that way of thinking happening, instead of it being, this is me and I've got no control and it's my brain thinking, if we give it an identity, and we gave it actually some characteristics, he was a bit of a cranky old man. He probably had a cane. He's been around forever. He's a bit intolerant. She really identified with that personality. She actually knew someone in her life. She was like, I know someone just like this. But when that feeling starts coming up in her now, she's going to go, oh, Tony, I can see that you're trying to look out for me. I can see what you're doing, and I really appreciate it, and I really don't need you right now. And just acknowledge it. So it's a quite a different conversation, but it's really interesting. So that social connection thing, I think at its baseline is about survival.
Yeah, I love that. And so there are different types of meditation practices, right? So what meditation practices have you found to be effective, particularly for supporting interpersonal relationships and
That's
social
an excellent
connection?
question. The best kind of meditation is the meditation that you do, right? If you're not meditating at all, it's a little bit like the best kind of exercise is the one that you do. So there's a few different ways to think about this. I think it begins with the self, right? So before we think about exploring out and all the social connection stuff, the very first relationship that you have is with you, right? And I think of me as a cell on the planet, right? Like in your body, you've got trillions and trillions and trillions of cells. And the quality of health of every single one of those cells will inform your total health. And so likewise, I think of every single human on the planet as being a cell on the planet. My responsibility is to be in the best emotional, spiritual, and physical health that I can be. That's my showing up for the planet. And if you do the same and everyone else does the same, the health of the whole planet improves.
Right.
Right. And so when things start going down, feeling bad, I mean, COVID isn't just the best example ever, not because of the physical virus, because of the mindset shift that happened. And because fear was the thing that was the most oppressive. Like you couldn't talk to someone, you couldn't turn on the telly, you couldn't turn on the radio without the tone being that of fear. And what does fear do? It wakes Tony up, right? And so you are then brought into that sympathetic state. You are reactive and responsive. You're not digesting. You're not in harmony. Your hormones might be out of whack. All of those baseline health things get challenged when you spend that much time in a fear state. So that was a good example of globally how the health of every single cell changed the health of the whole planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think speaking of Tony, I think I'm going to have to name my own reptilian part of the brain too. It sounds like it really helps. And, you're almost talking to yourself, but in order to take yourself a bit out of it, you're talking to someone else.
You're de-identifying.
Yeah. Something like that, basically, essentially, yes. So could you discuss any research findings or evidence in supporting the role of this practice in improving
Well, I want to go
social
back
connection?
because I had sort of a couple of different points to make. So the first one was that meditation with yourself, if you're showing up and meditating, that will in time have an impact on the social connection stuff, right? Because the more health I have and the better I feel, I'm going to engage with my family and friends more. I'm going to contribute at work more and I'll contribute in society more. Right. So that was kind of the first part of it. But then you can also do group meditation stuff. Like I said before, I do women's circles. Oh my gosh, there's something magic that happens when people come together like that and they sit with real intention and it's quite unspoken. It feels ancient. And even just sitting one-on-one, there's something really special about two energies holding space for each other.
100%. Yeah, I'm a firm believer that a few are better than one. You're always better as a group than on your own. Well, in general, yes. I believe
there are always going to be nuances, but
yeah.
conceptually. But you've got things like back to the tribe thing, right? When we were raised in that tribal condition, it was awesome because the child being raised got my influence, got your influence, got someone else's influence, got my experiences, got impressions from lots of different thoughts and opinions, was modeled lots of different behaviors you can choose to go towards or against. So doing anything in that collective group, whether it's meditating or not, can open your mind, can teach you new skills, can connect you with other people, new ways of thinking. I think what would help humanity's broad health is to remember that it's okay to change your mind, that it's okay to hold conflicting beliefs about something even, and that it's actually really okay to disagree with someone and you can still love that person or be really kind.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what is it exactly about practicing meditation that helps with social connection?
Well, again, I think, when I meditate for myself and I'm well, I'm going to contribute more. If we're thinking of, if you're wanting like more of a sciencey approach, the only sort of place that I know of that has any data that supports the effectiveness of things like meditation is a company called the HeartMath Institute. And they're about 30 or 40 years in, and they do an amazing job of blending science and spirituality. So, when we meditate or we do breath work and we go, oh, I feel great, I feel better, I feel coherent, I feel at ease, it's anecdotal, right? It's a bit like pain. If you and I both cut our fingers and we both say we experience pain, we don't know. I don't know what your pain experience is like. And I think the same is true for other things like the positive outcomes of meditation. And so what the HeartMath have done is they've used data and they've recorded loads of people's physiological feedback to start marrying up the behavior and the outcome and learning about the physiology. So I need to be clear, I'm not HeartMath trained. Two of the coaches at the clinic are HeartMath trained. And so that means they can take people through particular types of meditation. But what's really fascinating, and I've got a couple of notes that I will reference. So they talk about the heart and the brain. So we as humans have always been under the impression that the brain's in charge of everything and it's sort of one directional. It's feeding information and direction out to all the parts of your body and everything else is just obeying the master. And it turns out that might not be true. So HeartMath Institute say that the heart sends more signals to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. Fascinating, right? And so basically, they're looking at something called HRV, heart rate variability. So your heart beats, and we always think it's like boom, 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 boom. Oh, 70 beats a minute. But what heart rate variability looks at is the micro differences in the timing between the beats. And it's tiny. But what that's an indicator of is your adaptation to stress and your general health. So it's a really great way to be able to measure, are you ready to exercise? Are you well recovered? Are you in a stress state? Or are you in what these guys call a coherent state? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So what? So is this something that you think most people should be practicing or looking into?
I would never say I think most people should be doing anything. However, this is a really beautiful opportunity. So I'll tell you a bit more about this heart coherence that they talk about. So it's based on HRV, and they say that the field of energy from your heart actually comes out from your body. So it goes right through your body, and then it comes out of your body into a field in front of you. And I'll just read a couple of things. So it says the heart's magnetic field, which is the strongest rhythmic field produced by the human body, not only envelops every cell of the body, but it also extends out in all directions into the space around us. And the heart's magnetic field can be measured several feet away from the body. And so one of the types of meditation they do is called heart coherence. And so you would get into sort of that meditative state as in sort of quieten down, maybe close your eyes, take a nice breath in. And when you're breathing in, you're breathing into the heart space. So you're imagining your breath coming down into the heart space. And then you would be thinking thoughts of love, appreciation, or gratitude. So if we were doing it together, I would be thinking loving thoughts towards you and affirmative thoughts and gratitude thoughts. And I would actively be thinking that as I'm breathing in and out nice and slowly. So what's really exciting about this is they've actually got data. And so they've done it from human to human, but the ones that really captured me were the human to animal examples. So you can find these on their website. There are two examples that stand out. There's a little boy, Josh, and his dog. And they're both wearing heart rate monitors. And the dog's in a room and Josh walks into the room. And so firstly, they track your heart rate. So a normal sort of active, distracted heart rate's a little bit jagged, a little bit irregular, whereas the coherence heart rhythm looks kind of sine-like. It's got a really beautiful, soft and smooth pace to it. It's very even and balanced. So that's when they know that someone's in that coherent state. And so the little boy walks into the room, doesn't look at the dog, doesn't talk to the dog, doesn't touch the dog, doesn't engage with the dog at all, but does this heart coherence meditation for a minute, thinking loving thoughts. And then he leaves the room. And when you look at the heart rate monitor and the graph, so they're both kind of exactly the same sort of erratic, normal, busy, distracted. They go into coherence at exactly the same time. And then when he leaves the room, it goes back to that same distracted, fractured heart rate. And the same is true for a lady and her horse. So they've tracked this woman, I think her name was Ellen. Same thing, she's riding. She doesn't change anything. She doesn't give the horse any signals. She doesn't pat it. She doesn't change what she does with her legs. She just starts doing this meditation. And at exactly the same time on the graph, they both go into coherence. And then when she stops, they both go back to how they were. And so being able to measure something like that takes it away from being anecdotal and it makes it actually like, oh my gosh, I can influence you. I do it with my dog all the time.
That's incredible. I am so influenced to start doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do it on the tram, you know.
On the
like,
tram, yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
You know, if we're thinking of broadly like increasing the health of the planet and we ourselves on the planet, do it on that tram, in the elevator, do it in your car, think of other people. The worst thing that can happen is you feel better.
I'm a very visual person, so in my mind now, I'm just thinking about this world in which we are implanting one person everywhere in the world, all around, to do this, to send what people who use a lot of slang will call sending good vibes.
Yeah.
Is that why people feel this certain calmness with other people? Do you think? Maybe?
Look, I don't know because, again, I think, you know, having data and science that supports something is going to be helpful, right? To be able to say unequivocally, yes, that's true. But what we can all speak to is our own experiences. And what I'm wondering, and I don't know and I haven't looked into it, is I wonder if the opposite's true. The person on the tram filled with negative thoughts, like really like oppressing and suppressing their own vibration, glum chum. And if they're all moody and gross and annoyed with the person over there for chewing or whatever, I don't know, but I'm curious about what the effect of that is. Like,
yeah, me too, 100%.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
So that's kind of as close as I personally have got to science of meditation and the effects of meditation. But what I can absolutely say without a shadow of a doubt is that every single time I meditate, I feel like a better person.
Yeah. And that's really exciting, the research that they found.
Yeah,
and
amazing.
It's honestly life-changing. If more people knew about this and more people did it, they could improve the lives of the people around them so often, so much.
What it probably gives you is personal responsibility, right?
Yeah.
They've got a thing called an M wave, which essentially is just a little heart rate sensor. You put it on your finger or your ear, and then they get you to breathe a certain way, and then they get you to think a certain way, and then you watch your heart rate variability sort of go into that coherence, and then you realize how easy that is to do. Or with a little bit of practice, it can be quite easy. And then you know that even when you're not measuring, you could just be driving in your car doing it. You could just be at work before your next meeting and you can do it and regulate yourself. And then you're coming in with this beautiful energy and you're going to feel better from my energy. You just will.
And how important is it to practice it consistently?
Well, I would say, how many times do you go to the gym? How many times do you go on social media? How many times do you eat junk food? The number of times you do a thing is going to drive you towards your health goals or away from them, right? And it's lots of little reps. Even thinking of something like social media is probably a pretty good comparison point, right? If I get to the end of the day And I've been accidentally going on Instagram and going down rabbit holes, and I get to the end of the day, my mood and my experience of the day is going to be an outcome of where I spent my time and attention. So I guess if you were going to argue the same way for meditation, and it's really why I advocate for micro meditation, because if I said to you, all right, I want you to sit down once a day for 5 to 10 minutes, and you're going to feel good for that, right? You're not going to feel worse for having done it, unless you think that your mind shouldn't be busy and you end up being frustrated. But if I said to you, each time you get a glass of water today, or each time you go to open an email today, just before you do that, I'm going to ask you to do just one breath in through the nose, down into the belly. You're going to soften through your body and just do it once each time you do that task. That's called anchoring, right? We've got a new behavior we want to bring in. We want to marry it with something we already do, so we remember to do it. And you get to the end of the day and I say, oh, how do you feel at the end of today? And you've done it 10 times or 20 times. And then you do that every day for 2 months or 3 months. I guarantee you at the end of the day, you're going to feel like a different person than if you had chosen to spend that time doing whatever, social media, eating crap, whatever. Like, we are what we do.
Yeah, that makes it sound a lot more approachable, and I feel like I should be doing this in between recordings now, and that would help to center me as well.
Do you know the perfect time to do it is just before a meal? I wasn't raised religious. I've never done grace. But now that I know what I know about our physiology, so remember I've been saying rest, digest, reproduce, and repair. Digest. When we're in the parasympathetic is when we digest well. It's when our body rather prioritizes digestion, which means your body's producing the right enzymes, it's the right gastric juices. The conditions are prime for digestion. But if you're up here in a busy state, driving while you're eating, watching the news while you're eating, or not really chewing your food and being distracted, your body has not a care in the world for digestion. It doesn't know it's happening. It doesn't care that it's happening. It won't prioritize it. So before you eat a meal, one beautiful breath primes your body for digestion. It's like this lovely little marriage.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect practice for me to start doing as well, because I've been starting to eat without distractions. Yeah.
Amazing.
And it's been so great just because our lives are so busy and we're so stimulated all the time. And eating in itself, it's not an unstimulating activity by any means. You just have to focus on it. Focus on the textures, focus on the flavors, the flavor profile and everything. And it's not as unstimulating as most people think it is. The only reason they see it as an unstimulating activity is because they're focusing on something else, like a TV show or social media.
They don't even know they're doing it.
Yeah.
They didn't even taste it. I'm so fascinated. So what's your experience been like? Like, what have you got out of it?
Well, what I've got out of it actually, I didn't start it thinking that I'm going to do this all the time. But ever since I've started doing it, I've realized that my meals have been more fulfilling and I have felt a lot more gratitude towards the food. And I've stayed away from snacking a lot more just because I've gotten so much meaning out of the meal. And so my partner and I actually do this thing where, especially if we've cooked a meal, especially if we put in effort into a meal, we'll just sit down without a movie, even if we are going to watch a movie afterwards, which a lot of people do have their meals alongside the movies now.
Yeah.
But what we do is we sit down, we take time to be grateful for the meal that either of us cooked. And it's been really, really great. And then we share notes on how our experience was like with the meal. So this breath work before the meal sounds like a perfect companion to what I'm doing at the moment.
So impressed.
Impressed.
I'm so impressed.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Why is
because
that?
It's one of those things that's simple but not easy.
Oh,
so there's a
really?
real intention, isn't there? Like you've made an effort.
Yeah. I guess I didn't really think about it that way. But it definitely becomes easier when you genuinely want to do it and there's the intention
What
there.
was your goal when you decided, when you and your partner were first discussing it?
actually didn't really talk about a goal. We just wanted fulfillment in whatever that we're doing. We're just the kind of people that want to get fulfillment out of any aspect of our lives. So that I think is just a matter of our personalities and what we want out of life anyway. So it wasn't a specific goal, but more of just in general experiencing gratitude and fulfillment, I think.
So had you recognized that maybe you weren't getting as much fulfillment when you were eating?
Before,
Yeah.
yes, for sure. I was very much like up and go, 5 minute meal, 10 minutes, just eat while I'm watching a show. And I realized that my brain's just way too cluttered. It wasn't a good break at all. My brain's just still on that, like everything's about the show and also about the meal, and everything's like half. It's kind of split. It's like how Jack of all trades,
Master of
master
none.
of none. Well, I know that that's not the full quote, but
It's good enough.
for the purposes of the metaphor. If you split your concentration into like 50 different things, you're not gonna do it as well as if you concentrated on that one thing.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really think of that from that physiology perspective.
Yeah.
What is your body paying attention to? Yeah.
Absolutely. I love how all of this is tying in together. But in your experience coaching your clients, what have been the biggest challenges in attempting to implement this in their life?
I think it's the stuff we spoke about right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so it broadly comes down to perceptions of what meditation has to look like. Yeah. I was chatting with a patient recently. We were talking about stress, and she'd sort of said to me, when I'm stressed, I move. And so the idea of asking that particular person to sit down even for 5 minutes to meditate wasn't going to happen. And if she did it, she would have resented it. It would have just been a frustration. So we agreed on a walking meditation, which she could just get up from her desk, and eventually we built it in so that she could do it with her partner, so they could just hold hands and walk a lap around their apartment together. But I just remember her response when we talked it through and we agreed on the strategy. She was like, can I really do this? Is this meditation? To which I was like, well, do you feel calmer when you're doing it? Are we signaling to your body that we can pay attention to healing and recovery and digestion and hormones? And she was like, yeah. And permission, I think, is the thing that a lot of people are like, they need to know that they're allowed to do it, and it's allowed to look different from everything they've seen and been taught.
And what changes did she experience after being able to implement this in her life?
Oh, it's continuing. So it's a practice. Like I said before, how many times you do it is kind of going to build up for your outcomes. She said to me she started doing things like nature gazing. So she said she'd end up on her balcony and she'd just be there staring out at the trees. Creativity increased. And I think what I see across patients who particularly are living in a stressful role, whether it's a parenting role or a work position, is they have more resilience. Like they've got more capacity for stuff, And it reminds me of something, almost one of the first people I ever spoke to about meditation about 15 years ago. She was a really successful businesswoman. I was actually operating a hyperbaric oxygen chamber at that time. So she'd come in and she was telling me all of these things that were happening and how stressed she was. And she was really successful, beautifully dressed, financially successful, stressed off her chops, like so stressed out. And I said to her, I'm wondering if you've thought of meditation as one of your options. And she said, I tried it once and it didn't work. And I kept a professional face. But I was thinking, fascinating, with this idea that you've got to just do things one time and that's the solution, right? No, meditation, this signaling is ongoing. But you build resilience, and then with time, you get to it quicker. You can find it easier. Your body, the neuroplasticity part of it means that your brain has rewired, and so your default state becomes the calmer state. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to me. Now, before we end off the interview section, what last pieces of advice do you have for those who are hoping to practice meditation, especially to support their relationships and social connection?
Yeah. Well, the thing I often say to somebody is, imagine you're at the very end of your life and you've got an opportunity to look back and influence and inform the decisions that you make and how you live your life. Would you want to build in a practice that helps you feel more connected to yourself, to spirituality, and to other people as an outcome of you feeling great?
Yeah.
Would you do that? Sort of not to guilt anyone into it, but to, we go through our lives and we get distracted and we get caught up in our lives. But if we're thinking of them as like, I'm at the end and I'm looking back, that can be such a great little, prompt to really think about, what do I want to do differently?
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't have to be like you know about this meditation practices now, you have to do it tomorrow. You know, now that you know the information, it's there for you to do it at any point in time. You don't have to start today. You can think about it a little bit more, and there's absolutely no rush to start it and practice it today.
Or you can do it this very moment just by taking one breath.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Now moving on to the practices and habits section. This is more about the everyday application of what you've just shared with us, which I think will be really, really interesting. Now, you've shared quite a few tips for developing these habits to start meditation, but are there any other practices that you do to manage your meditation practice?
Yeah, I make mine a non-negotiable start to my day. So I'm not thinking about whether or not I'm in the mood. I'm not negotiating with my clock. I'm not competing with anything. Before I get out of bed, I do meditation and I do breath work, and I don't negotiate.
Yeah, I should definitely replace that with scrolling on social media. That's not helpful.
Well, do you know what's interesting? So I did a post on Instagram yesterday because I found myself getting into, and I've said it a couple of times as an example, but I noticed I was lazily getting onto Instagram for nothing, right? And getting on there and kind of going, why am I even on here? But I am on here, and there's an algorithm that wants to get me here. And so one of the things I do in coaching, if someone, and it tends to happen more around food, but if someone's saying, oh, B, I keep snacking after dinner, or I keep having the ice cream and I don't want to, or whatever, we'll discuss it. We'll talk about what's coming up emotionally and what the habits and behaviors are. But I'll give you the snapshot. I might say, okay, so you want to change that behavior. When you tell your brain you can't have something, what does your brain do?
Want something.
It wants it more.
Yeah,
it wants it more than ever.
Yeah, it's like you're telling someone, don't think of an elephant.
Yeah.
What are they thinking about now?
Exactly.
An elephant. Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll say, well, you can have the thing, and before you have it, let's do some interrupting. We'll have a big glass of water, and then we want to use the brain in a different way, right? So we want to do something physical, go for a walk around the block, do some squats, push-ups, star jumps, or something like that, knowing that if you have your glass of water, you go for your walk around the block and do some star jumps, and you come back and you want to still have the ice cream, have the ice cream. Chances are you're going to come at it with a slightly, like a less reactive kind of response. And so I applied the same thing to Instagram. I decided that before I open my Instagram app, I have to do exercises, 5 squats or 5 push-ups or something, but it has to be like a proper exercise. And so now I can't get on Instagram when I'm in bed, because I can't do squats in bed. I physically can't do it. And the idea of getting up to do squats so I can go on Instagram, I'm not doing it. And then I'm out socially. I can't squat everywhere I am because sometimes that just doesn't socially fit. So it's kind of great. It's a great barrier in a couple of ways, right? It's socially a tricky thing to do. But it's an interrupter. I needed something to get in the way of that habit and that lazy just dive in. And I'm using Instagram like a third of what I was.
Yeah.
So if you're getting on it in bed, that might be a good way to get around it.
I love that approach that you just mentioned, that you just shared with me. Could I just quickly apply this to my life and get your thoughts on this?
Sure.
Because I love some gratification. So I'm really hoping to increase my productivity with cleaning, or at least proactiveness with cleaning in my home. There's a lot of clutter that I need to get rid of. Now, I don't necessarily need to stop scrolling social media altogether, but what I want to do is hold myself accountable. So instead of making myself do something that I like most likely won't be able to do, could I combine that 15-minute win tidying practice that I mentioned to you earlier on with the social media thing? So I do a 15-minute win session where I take 15 minutes to clean as much as I can. And after that, I can rest and scroll through social media. What are your thoughts on that?
Find what works for you.
Yeah.
Like trial it.
Yeah.
And if it works, great. I worked with a
Yeah.
coach years ago who actually said to me, thinking of those menial tasks, like putting the laundry away or putting that thing back in the cupboard or whatever. And he said to me, B, if there's a task you can do in under 30 seconds, do not delay it. Get it done. Because, it's that thing of like, oh, it's still sitting. I've walked past it 20 times and it's still on the seat. Look, I think that's great. What we each need to do, because we're all different humans, right, is figure out what actually works for your psychology and your lifestyle. So if you do that and it ends up being that sounds like a nice little reward option, great. And so does that mean then that you wouldn't look at social media any other time? Or like, are you doing it on the back of reward only?
Yeah, I haven't thought that far, actually. I just came up with this.
Okay. Play. I would say play with it.
But yeah, I love what you just mentioned about kind of analyzing your own lifestyle and what your psychology is. I feel like that's something that people are missing with meditation practice is that, well, I know that firsthand because I always looked at meditation practices as something that looks a certain way from everything that I've seen online, where in reality, especially after speaking to all of these meditation experts, including you, it's really what works for your lifestyle, your goals, and you have to do the work of identifying what your goals are.
What your
that
drivers
is.
are, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What your drivers are as well. So that's really interesting to me. But what do you think are the challenges in doing that?
I think a lot of people aren't thinking about who they are. They're not thinking about the way that they behave. There's a really great psychometric that you can do really easily. It's positive psychology. So basically, they think of parts of your personality as saboteurs. And the saboteur could be something that actually could be seen as quite positive, like you might be a hyperachiever or you might be a pleaser. And so in a work scenario, the fact that you're a pleaser is amazing for your boss because it means you're going to get everything done, you're going to be really efficient and all of that stuff. But the pleaser can also be detrimental because you can have really poor boundaries with other people. So as far as psychometrics and getting to know yourself, Gretchen Rubin's got 4 tendencies. The positive psychology psychometrics are really helpful. But as a first step, I mean, you could ask people, but that can be a little bit tricky depending on how people want to share with you or how honest people want to be. But that a little bit of analysis. You don't want to get stuck on that and you don't want to think that you are stuck there either, that doesn't define who you are. But really helpful from a coaching perspective, particularly the hypervigilance, the pleasers and the avoiders, when we see that, and we can see that someone comes up right at the top as an avoider, we can anchor to that now in coaching conversations and sort of get curious about, is this the avoider in play? Yeah. And you can go deeper and find out where the avoider came from. Most of our behaviour is designed from our childhood, as Gabor Mate would explain beautifully. So understanding that, but the very act of meditation, being introspective, if you're willing to look and sit and be a bit honest with yourself, can also give you some really lovely insights. And that question, why? I'm noticing, for example, you were saying earlier about the frustration of meditation when you can't empty your mind. Why? Why is that frustrating? Oh, because I think meditation needs to look this way. Why do you think that? And da-da-da-da. And so the why, just like if you think you've got to your last why, ask one more because there's some magic under why.
Yeah, that's a really good that's really good advice. And it's really interesting because, well, that being introspective in the first place, that's a huge job for a lot of people. So what advice do you have for that?
It will come down to where people are in their own lives and what their desire is to find out. Not everyone wants to know, and that's fine, And I think it's also quite hard to truly see yourself. I've got a story of me. I think I'm a certain way. And if I got the report at the end of my life that said how everyone else actually experienced me, I'm probably going to be really shocked. But it might not line up with how I think I actually am, because all of the subtleties of my psyche are in play all the time. So it's an interesting thing. I think firstly you need to want to know, are you curious about it? And if you are, be really gentle. The lens of curiosity is the lens that I use all of the time in coaching. And the reason I love curiosity is it's really kind, because it's an observer. I actually visualize it hovering up above you. So you're in a scenario and I'd say, you're just hovering up. You're actually just noticing what's happening, and you can see your reaction and someone else's reaction, and you're not making any of that right or wrong, but you become an observer.
Yeah.
You can learn tons that way.
Yeah. And it's also a really good practice to do, even in general. It doesn't have to be for meditation. It doesn't have to be for figuring out what you want to do with your meditation. So that's really good advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now move on to the open mic section. This is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to the topic, but if it is, that's all good. You can feel free to continue chatting about that. We welcome that here. So the floor is completely yours. Take it away, B.
Oh my gosh, you've opened a can of worms with me. You can see I'm a talker. I think I really think that starting to meditate can change your life so much. Like, I am a completely different person to who I was. And I'm not talking about the way I act or behave. I'm talking about the way I feel on the inside. Because for years and years, I was so stressed. Like, it was like a current running hot through my body all the time. And I couldn't sit still. And if I did, I was just agitated. I got up in the middle of a dinner party to clean the front of my dishwasher. And that for me wasn't about cleanliness. That for me was about an inability to be present. It had a massive impact on my relationship with my daughter while she was growing up, because I found it really hard just to sit and be with her. No doubt it impacted all of my relationships, but massively with myself. But I think of it more like I can remember the feeling in my body. And it was just this buzzy, uneasy. I'd wake up worrying. And when I think about my internal operating system now, I can't even tell you. It feels like a river, like a really gentle river, easeful and calm. And I have stuff still happen. Like, I still get stressed. Like, I still live in the world.
That's normal.
But my operating system is the standout thing about it for me is just how different I feel inside my body. And that then changes who I am and then how I relate. And I just feel like if the benefits of meditation were a pill, it would sell out in a heartbeat. It would overtake Ozempic rapidly, because the impact of it is massive. And it changes the way your brain thinks, it changes your creativity, it changes your responsiveness, it changes your ease of life. You rest better, you play better. Put that in a pill. Who's not going to take it? And all you have to do to get that is just start breathing as a first step. And like we said earlier, if you end up being somewhere where you have this amazing, incredible, deep spiritual practice, even better. But the reality of that for most people, it's too complex and it takes a lot of time, and we're busy working people. So I feel like there's this magic pill at everyone's fingertips, but people don't realize how easy it is to take.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, B. Now, you have some 5-minute meditation practices up on your website, I believe. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I've got a couple there so people can see if they like my voice.
I do love your voice.
When you go on meditations and they start talking, you're like, oh, this isn't going to work out. But also because they are so short, it's a lovely way for people just to jump in. But I've also just launched a course called Unmeditating. It's an introduction to meditation for busy people. And it is all about micro meditations. And as I said before, I also run women's circles.
Yeah, amazing. So where can we find this website?
Well, if you wanted to explore it, so I've mostly talked today or referenced the patients that I've worked with. So Melbourne Functional Medicine is where I'm a coach. So we work with two really key groups of people. We've got people who've got, poor health. They've struggled for ages. They've seen lots of specialists and they just can't get the answers. So functional medicine as an approach is great, and we coach everyone who works with us. But the other site you can jump onto is B Pennington, so that's Pennington.com. And as you said, we've got some meditations. I've also written a book about healthy boundaries based on a lot of my coaching conversations. And I've just also put a link to that short course up there as well.
All right. We'll link all of those in the show notes below. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you once again, B, for joining us on the show. It's been such a fascinating conversation and honestly really, really inspiring. I'm going to keep going at it with the meditation practices and the mindfulness. And yeah, I hope everyone takes something away from this as well as much as I have, and we'll catch all of you in the next episode.
You've been listening to the Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pe.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.